to episode 9 of Chris Sweeney Talks To. Today I'm joined by Ewan McKenna. Now he's a very successful journalist. He was Irish Sports Journalist of the Year in 2012. He's written for New York Times, ESPN, The Independent, many big newspapers, platforms across the world. And it's a pleasure to be joined by him today. How are you, Ewan?
I'm keeping very well. Lovely to be on the show.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much. And today you're on today to talk about Daniel Kinahan. Now, I think maybe people may have heard about Daniel Kinahan recently. He's an Irish man who has been sanctioned, or the US government is offering $5 million for information relating to the financial disruption of his organisation and also his capture. Him, his brother, and his father as well, which is it's a fairly big deal. It's gone all around the world, and he's become a wanted man. But you've been writing about Daniel Kinahan for many years. I mean, you've known about him for a long time. In Ireland, this is not news, so shall we say?
No, it's more, I guess, a relief from the authorities' point of view that the weight of the US has come in behind this to try and stop him. But he's been known in Ireland for many, many years. There's the Kinahan cartel, which is his family. He's the head of it. He took over from his father, Christie Senior. And they've been there's another gang called the Hutch Gang, and they've been basically beating the shit out of each other for quite a few years. Kinahan would be one of the biggest cocaine importers, if the authorities are to be believed, in Europe, right across Europe. He has huge assets reaching from Brazil to Sierra Leone to interests in China. He lives in the UAE. And his gang, aside from drugs, they're also known for being very, very good at washing money. So other cartels come to them with their money and they wash it for them. So they're extremely prominent. There's been 15 or 16 killings kind of in a tit for tat in Dublin and the surrounds over the last decade or so. And Daniel obviously he loves boxing. It's a passion of his. And he's a bloody good manager, which that just doesn't really sit well when you're a cartel leader. And he's been kind of the growth of MTK, for example, which he co-founded with Matthew Macklin, the former European middleweight champion. That was founded in 2013, and Kinahan was kind of in the background for a lot of it. Macklin was supposed to be the face of it, but over the years, Kinahan grew and grew and grew and kind of became very, very prominent. And people who know this better than me in crime rather than in sport would talk about how he would have seen boxing as an aim to kind of become a legitimate businessman, to step out of the shadows. But that was never going to happen. And in fact, across boxing through the years, for example, in 2014, there was an attempt to assassinate him in Spain, and boxer Jamie Moore ended up getting shot in the leg. Come 2015 in Dublin at a weigh-in for a boxing event, only a gun jamming stopped him being killed. A year later, in 2016, in the Regency Hotel in Dublin, there was another weigh-in for a fight, an MTK fight. He was there. And Hutch gunmen came in, some dressed as police, one was dressed as a woman, to try and assassinate him, and ended up killing a friend of his at the weigh-in. So, violence has followed it. But it's been quite amazing because, this has all been out there for many, many years. And only more recently have media copped onto it abroad, I would say, and have started to cover it. But they've also spent years, as MTK grew into a major, major boxing organisation, never questioning this. Their fighters were never questioned it. When Anthony Joshua and Tyson Fury was announced a couple of years back, and obviously it still hasn't happened, but Fury would have kind of talked about how great Daniel was, etc., etc. And for example, the BBC would have actually cut that little clip when they were doing the press conference. They didn't even show it. The Telegraph called him a sometimes controversial figure. Talksport didn't even mention it. And when you're dealing with one of the major drug men in Europe, if not the world, to have him so closely associated with boxing and for that to be accepted is it's troubling. And it's kind of, from an Irish angle, it's been disappointing as well, because I love boxing and I love talking to boxers because they have a need to sell themselves. They're very honest. It's not like a Premier League press conference or whatever else, but a lot of them come from tough working class backgrounds. And yet these are the same areas that have been decimated by the Kinahan feud with the Hutches, decimated by his drugs, decimated by addiction and violence. So it's been difficult in Ireland to balance fighters we like and love who came up from the amateur ranks, did very well in the Olympics, superb boxers as pros like Michael Conlon and Carl Frampton, and to see them then kind of pushing Kinahan and this MTK juggernaut. And that hasn't sat well for quite a while.
No, I mean the reason why I want to speak to yourself was, I mean, anyone can go online and you've got a 2018 article in the Independent, one of your articles, and you compare Daniel Kinahan to Pablo Escobar in the sense that Pablo Escobar liked football or soccer, and Daniel Kinahan's done that with boxing. And what I find so surprising from my side is that, like you see, you wrote that 4 years ago. I mean, how come no one's taken this seriously, or everyone else just seems to have ignored it or blanked out? I mean, it just seems perplexing.
Yeah, I guess when you step back, though, and you see sport, I mean, Kinahan is obviously a very unsavoury character, to put it mildly, but sport has no problem dealing with people I would say are actually worse than him. When you look at the likes of Abu Dhabi with Manchester City, when you look at Saudi Arabia with Newcastle, I mean, these people are starving children on an industrial scale next door in Yemen, yet we're more than happy to take the Spanish Cup final to Riyadh, and our boxing matches there and our World Cups there, and everything is for sale. And it wasn't just that it was ignored. Media and sponsors actively got involved with these people. They knew this, but they were more than happy to deal with them, to be part of these promotions, to make money out of it, to buy the rights for TV, to have their name on the ring at these fights. And I guess, look, I mean, I suppose money comes before morality always, and sport is no different.
Yeah, well, I mean, today we're speaking in the week leading up to a massive, if anyone's not a sports fan or a boxing fan, there's a massive fight happening this weekend at Wembley Stadium, 94,000 people, Tyson Fury against Dillian Whyte. Tyson Fury is the WBC World Heavyweight Champion of the world. And, I mean, he's very, very close or linked to Daniel Kinahan. He's talked about him, this MTK management company. I even looked just before we spoke. There's pictures of Tyson Fury on their website. There's posters with the branding on it. It seems like people are still not stepping away. I mean, I've not heard many boxers or anyone really come out and speak about him. Do you think they're scared, or do you think they don't want to, or they don't care?
It's hard to know. Is it fear, or is it fear of biting the hand that feeds you? Because there isn't. Boxing is a hard place to make a living until you get to the very top, where you are a Tyson Fury or whatever else. And a lot of fighters are struggling to get by. And MTK, in one sense, were a godsend in that way, because they had very, very deep pockets. And Kinahan is genuinely very passionate about boxing and wants to be involved in it. So it's hard to know. I mean, I've spoken to people off the record, and when you're writing these pieces, it was quite odd in that they wanted to talk on encrypted lines, or they wouldn't send text messages. So there was a fear in that sense. And some people would have told me, other boxing promoters would have said, look, if Kinahan and MTK want your fighters from your stable in the morning, you just say go. You're not going to stand in their way. So there is an intimidation thing about that. And I guess even though I kind of gangland and the wrong side of the tracks, or whatever you want to call it, has always been attracted to boxing, and boxers have always been attracted to that thing. That's always been the way they come together as archetypes in that sense. So maybe there's a little bit of, well, this is no different to what went before. That doesn't mean it's right, but I mean, there's always been, from the mob back in the day right through to this. And I think as well in sport, maybe journalists and so on aren't used to dealing with this side of it. Like, I always think crime correspondents have giant cojones dealing with this, and maybe there is that fear. You don't know, should I write this, and will he read this, and how will that go down, and am I putting myself in danger? So there might be a little bit of that in it.
Well, I mean, I spoke to someone else when I was doing a bit of research, and there's a person online that speaks a lot about Daniel Kinahan, very critical, and I said, well, would you like to maybe talk to me about it? And they said, no chance, I don't want a bullet. That was their answer to me. Yourself speaking about it and writing about it, have you encountered any resistance, any intimidation from your reporting on it?
No, I mean, I've spoken to crime journalists, and a few of them would have told me that it's very, very unlikely. I mean, thankfully, there hasn't been a journalist killed south of the border in the Republic of Ireland for many, many years, back to Veronica Guerin in the mid-90s. So, and he's too clever. He's not going to, I mean, what good is that going to do? I mean, it'll just put more pressure on him. It'll open more and more eyes to the guy, and he's too smart to do that. So no, there wasn't that fear there. I mean, you get the trolls and the idiots online and kind of, that sort of stuff, but they come after you for everything anyway.
Yeah. And I mean, another thing I'd like to ask about maybe is the fact of Ireland now. So, I mean, like we say, the US government's put a $5 million bounty or whatever you want to call it on him as big wanted posters. I mean, that's a fairly serious step. Do you feel yourself that Ireland's been ignored? Because, I mean, this has been going on for a while. Why now? Why now have we seen this happen when, like you say, people like you have been reporting on this, talking about it for 4, 5, 6 years?
I guess it's a case of evidence. I mean, and at what point are you innocent until proven guilty is the other side of this. I mean, it's everybody knows, but you need to go through the legal process. Now, Kinahan lives in Dubai or Abu Dhabi, one of them out in the UAE.
I think it's Dubai, yeah.
And there's no extradition order between Ireland and the UAE now. There are ways around that. But it's taken a long time to build a case, I guess, and to get to the point of having enough evidence to build that case. And I mean, only in the last couple of years, like in 2018, the Criminal Assets Bureau in Ireland had said in court that he controlled the cartel. That was a kind of a big step because that hadn't been said on the record as such before. And come 2019, there were kind of sworn affidavits leaked that showed that him and his brother were in charge of the cartel. But I guess it is just about, now I'm no legal expert, but I'd imagine, there's quite a high burden of proof if you want to convict a guy of organising killings, of running a cartel, all these things. And I guess that takes time.
And I mean, and also maybe the temperature in Ireland, because I mean Ireland's had to deal with this, like you say, for a number of years. I mean, with shootings, like you say, and production of drugs and all that bad stuff. But it seems to have not. No one seems to have been too bothered. It seems to be kind of left on your own with it. Is that? Do you think people of Ireland have been let down here by a little bit by the kind of maybe international organisations that this has been going on for a while and they've just been kind of left to deal with it on their own?
It's hard to know. I mean, it is our problem, so maybe we're the ones who deal with it. I mean, from a sporting perspective, it's absolutely decimated boxing in Ireland, south of the border, because MTK, for example, would have. Basically, there was a woman in, what year? Sandra Vaughan is her name, Scottish woman, and she took over MTK. It was founded in 2013. She comes along anyhow, and she says, well, now this is mine. It's nothing to do with Kinahan. And yet, like, for example, there was a boxer like Stephen Simmons would have said all chats still have to go through Daniel Kinahan. Jack Catterall, another boxer, said, I'm advised by Kinahan. Super featherweight Declan Geraghty, he said he's a great manager and he kind of revived Irish boxing and all this thing. And Vaughan, I mean, her previous company was liquidated, and like the obvious questions were, where did she get the money to buy this? Where did she get the money to invest in all of this? She's Scottish. Why did she relocate to Dubai, to Kinahan's backyard? Why is he still in the background all the time? And she could never answer any of them. And if there were answers, she would have given them. So, I mean, there was still this presence of Kinahan in the background and this notion that maybe she was just a front. But the Irish media really went after that for a while. And she basically pulled MTK out of Ireland. There were no professional bouts south of the border. And then even come 2017, they finally announced, okay, we'll bring, because they had a load of Irish boxers in their stable. And there was going to be a bout in Dublin in the City West Hotel. And the media leaked that there were going to be 6 units of the armed police, the Gardaí in Ireland. And the hotel cancelled it then. They said, we don't want this here then. And she was furious over that. And she had her boxers basically stop talking to the Irish media. They ran this campaign on social media called Fair News, because she thought she was getting the wrong end of the stick. And it got to the point, I mean, you couldn't have MTK fights in Dublin or in the Republic because it was getting too dangerous. The Boxing Union of Ireland, the kind of governing body of professional boxing in Ireland, said as much. They said, I mean, it's just bringing the wrong people and things are going to kick off here. And as I say, I mean, there's been two weigh-ins in 2015 and 2016 where shots were fired and one person was killed.
Yeah, I mean, it really is. I mean, when you lay it out like that, I mean, it's almost decimated the sport, in Ireland. But then outside of Ireland, he's involved with all these, or the company's involved with all these massive household names. Like we said, I mean, the event happened this week at Wembley. I mean, I don't think probably the biggest boxing event of the year, I'm pretty sure. I mean, or maybe the last couple of years, and it just like seems he's in the centre of it. I mean, it just seems almost. It just seems almost beggars belief that the other people around, like, because I mean, there's big international corporations like Sky TV, BT. There's IFL TV, which is a kind of online, and they're sponsored by them. I mean, the logo comes up MTK before all their videos. I mean, it just seems bemusing that all these people have just turned a blind eye and just carried on.
Yeah, it is quite something. And I mean, even ESPN in the States, I mean, they've really embedded themselves in it. And they keep using this excuse that MTK isn't Daniel Kinahan's, it's Sandra Vaughan's. And that's just the cover for all of this. I mean, as I say, she can't answer these questions of where she got the money. And I mean, she's an interesting career herself. I mean, she's never been implicated in any wrongdoing, but the Scottish Crime and Drug Enforcement Agency in August 2010 raided her house, and the charges were subsequently withdrawn. But I mean, she married a guy, Danny Vaughan is his name. He was a coach in MTK, but he did 10 months in jail for a 13-year, £100,000 benefit fraudster scam. So I mean, they're just not nice people. But again, if you can put on a show and once the ring walk starts on Saturday night and the hype starts and Fury enters the ring, that's all everyone's going to be talking about. And it's amazing how that can take over everything. But then, as I say, it does it in other sports. I mean, here we are talking daily about what Russia is doing is terrible. Well, doing business in sport with Saudi, with the UAE, with all these other places. And that's, again, like, for example, with Manchester City or whatever else, people might give out about it beforehand, but the minute the football starts, they'll talk about, Jesus, that's sexy football. Guardiola's amazing. So it does take over people's consciousness very quickly, which is quite grim. And it lacks a lot of morality. It's quite interesting to hear so many media companies over the last few years kind of talk about, I guess, target people. Oh, you're an anti-vaxxer, or oh, you're this or you're that. And they've this kind of air of morality. And they're always talking down to people. Yet in the background, they've absolutely no problem doing deals and making money off the likes of Kinahan and his boxers and MTK and all these things.
Yeah, absolutely. Yourself, because I mean, I did see you wrote that piece in 2018. I know you've written other pieces around the Daniel Kinahan situation, which people can find online. But have you noticed that you would have wanted to do more? Have you felt there's a lack of platforms? Because I mean, there seems to be a lot in this. Have you felt a resistance that I could do more, but some of the platforms don't want to host it, or they don't want to hear it?
No, I never had that problem. I mean, when I did write it, I know, like, the Ring magazine, the boxing magazine, their podcast had me on at one stage. I guess there's just nothing more you can say. Like, there's only so much you can do until the authorities do something about it. And it can feel like just shouting into an empty field sometimes, because you write this article, but then everyone's talking about the fight on Saturday. So there's only so much you can do. There's only so much you can say. I mean, the information is out there. It's up to people and sponsors and media companies to either digest it or ignore it, and they've largely done the latter.
Do you think now? But I mean, do you think that maybe fans might now be aware? I mean, I know we're saying people, people they want to see the event, but I mean, I do think there is a large number of people who, maybe don't want to associate with this. Do you think now maybe this is out there? People going to these big shows may go, hold on a minute here. I don't know if I want to be spending my hard-earned money buying a ticket to an event that's implicated or involved in all this kind of drug cartel, violence, shootings, etc.
Honestly, I don't think they care. If I don't, I think they'll be excited come Saturday. They'll pack into Wembley. The beer will be flowing. The music will come on. The ring walks will be going. Fury will win, and they'll be talking about that afterwards. I think people just want to be entertained, and I guess far be it. I'm not defending Daniel Kinahan in any way, but I guess the money for most stuff comes from fairly grim sources in the background, whether it's white collar criminals or the likes of him, or is it some, I mean, anything involving big money usually tends to come from some odious people. To get that level of wealth, they probably had to do some pretty horrific things, and that applies. I couldn't, if that could be Kinahan, or it could be, I don't know, Nike, if they're sponsoring it, who are having kids in Cambodia, so they're sneakers, So there's more than just him. I mean, it's easy to go, isn't it disgusting that he's involved in this? But I guess when you step back, it's not uncommon for unsavory people to be funding a lot of these things.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one thing I did think was sort of slightly I didn't like was obviously we had the Russia thing with Chelsea being owned by Abramovich, and I think their manager spoke, and when they had Newcastle, Eddie Howe was asked questions, the manager of Newcastle, and he didn't really say much, but at least the question was asked. From what I've read, when people are not going to be able to ask Tyson Fury and these boxers about Daniel Kinahan. And I don't know if you saw the thing on the weekend. There was a MMA MMA fighter in America. His name escapes me, but he was asked about it, and he then started to go on about how Daniel Kinahan was a good guy, and he didn't know any of the other stuff, and he almost was defending him, and it was a kind of bizarre thing. You thought, have you looked at the news in the last 2 weeks? Are you aware what this guy's done? It just seemed crazy.
Yeah, I guess, and I was thinking about this before I came on, and again, not to defend any of these people. I just, can you be friends with someone who has a shady side? Should you be friends? Is it guilt by association? I mean, can you separate the two things? I don't know what the answer is to that, and maybe people have different views. I mean, do you stand by people who've been very good to you, even if they have this other side? I don't know. And I guess, it goes back to this thing where we go after the athletes in this case, the guys who are beating each other to unconsciousness in a cage for a couple of €1,000. That's disgraceful. Oh, you should be calling out this guy. But I think it's the people at the other end in the suits who are doing business with him who have a choice. I mean, they've the financial means to do other things, whereas a lot of these fighters are probably more reliant on paying the bills through this. So I guess rather than condemn a fighter, maybe it's the other end, the deals taking place in 5-star hotel rooms, and in conference centres for millions and millions of euros. Maybe they're the ones who need to be asked the questions.
I mean, as a journalist, you've kind of said that you've got a slightly glass half empty on this one. You don't think too much is going to change, but do you think the likes of the big networks now, the TV networks, your Sky Sports, your ESPNs, whatever it is around the world, BBC, do you think now they're going to say, hold on a minute, this has gone far enough, or do you think no?
It's hard to know. I mean, even this 5 million bounty on his head kind of flickered by very quickly. I mean, it was in the news 1 minute, and as you say, I think Alan Dawson was the journalist who asked the MMA fighter in LA or wherever it was about it, and you might get one or two questions. But I mean, it's largely gone past. I mean, if you flick through the newspapers, there'll be a lot more about Fury and analysing the fight and looking ahead to it than there is about this. And I mean, it doesn't seem to have bothered anyone involved in it. Maybe if he is arrested, then they'll go, oh, thank God he's out of it, and normal service resumes. But I mean, they haven't stepped away from it knowing all this already. So I'm not sure why they would. And it's just kind of buried and bypassed, and just life goes on, it seems, and it's just ignored. Yeah. And in terms of Ireland, sort of normal people, day to day, how aware would they be of Daniel Kinahan? I mean, is he a kind of household name in Ireland? Would most people know who he is and be well aware of all this? This is not news to anyone in Ireland, all this stuff that's come out over the last week or so? Oh, he'd be extremely well known. Yeah, he'd be very, very well known. I mean, he's always in the front pages of the tabloids, and there's a lot of raids on his associates by the Criminal Assets Bureau, and they're always, finding tons of watches, cars. I mean, he's a billionaire with huge interests around the world. So yeah, and because there's been this tit for tat war between the Kinahan cartel and the Hutches, who are this others, because of all these murders in a country where murders don't tend to happen. I mean, it's been very prominent on the news for quite a few years now. So yeah, I mean, everyone, he would be a household name. Yeah, because I think if someone say to me, I'm obviously from Scotland, and it's not that far from Ireland, but if someone say to me a sort of cartel leader, I'm thinking South America,
I'm thinking maybe, Asia, but I'm definitely not thinking Ireland. It's just, it's not what you imagine. I don't know if maybe that's maybe one reason why people don't take it seriously, because you're not imagining an international drug cartel to be based in Ireland.
No, I mean, maybe it's not as sexy as Pablo Escobar or your Mexican cartels or whatever else, and there isn't that kind of lore and myth around it in film and in writing and whatever else. There hasn't been 10 Netflix series. I do think, I mean, it's an awkward one, because when you think about it on a personal level, I mean, he's obviously done some atrocious things. He's obviously involved in a horrible place. He was born into it, though. I mean, it must be quite an interesting thing to be born the son of a cartel leader and to inherit this. And how do you get away from that, or can you get away from that? So that does interest me. I mean, I'd love to. I would love to interview him at some stage and ask him these things, because it does fascinate me in a kind of a morbid way.
Yeah. I mean, how close have you got? I mean, maybe you can't real names, but how close have you got to speaking to people around him or know him or next to him? Has there ever been a dialogue between them and the media?
With a few people on Twitter who worked for MTK and some of their press affiliates, and they were kind of, there was a lot of PR pushing how he wasn't this guy, people were saying, and they'd get onto you. I've sent a few of them private messages on Twitter, and they come back to you and they go, oh, well, you can have an interview if you say this about him on Twitter, if you say he hasn't done this, if you say he hasn't done that. So if you become part of their PR war. Now, how close they are, or if they could have got you an interview, I don't know, but obviously you're not going to push their spin for the favour.
Yeah. Because I read that. I think that one of the boxers had. I read online that one of the well-known boxers had sent a message to someone saying, "I can get you an interview with Daniel, but you have to put something on Twitter about he's a good guy or he's not done this," which is what journalists would do that.
Yeah, exactly. Although there were quite a few who were happy to take the money and. Kind of they jumped ship from newspapers into MTK and into marketing of that, so they seem more than happy to do it.
And his father, I mean, you were saying he was born into it, so was his father as powerful as him, or has he taken it up a level, or was it such a big organisation before he sort of took over?
It was quite big, but it's grown. I mean, Daniel is extremely smart. That's the thing. I mean, he's a very, very bright guy. And he's good at what he does. It's just a pity he's put his energy into leading a drug cartel. So it has grown. And I mean, as I say, their assets and interests run from Brazil to Africa to China, run from drug smuggling to money laundering. I mean, the crime correspondents I would rely on, who know a lot more about this, would talk about him being by far the biggest cocaine supplier across Europe. So it's a hell of an empire they have. Now it might be about to come tumbling down, as all these things in gangland culture tend to do. Yeah,
and just to go back to something you said at the start, how he was a big boxing fan. This is a kind of passion of his. He's not doing this for any other reason than he wants to be part of boxing. But do you think that's been his undoing, because he's become so visible, famous through the famous boxers and the world champions that he's involved with, that it's almost made him a target to the mainstream?
Well, I think like that shooting back in 2016 where the Hutch gang tried to assassinate him, they would have picked that very specifically to make sure he couldn't fulfill his ambitions in boxing and come across as a legitimate man. So that would have been there would have been thinking gone into why that was done there, and that absolutely ruined his ambitions of becoming this legitimate guy through boxing. So that would have highlighted it, and a lot of the violence has been around boxing and boxers. But I guess behind it, I mean, away from the sports pages and away from us talking, you would have to imagine with a cartel that size and everything else, that behind the scenes authorities would have gone after him regardless.
Yeah. I think maybe it's just made them maybe more well known to someone like myself or other people, because I was aware of his name around this MTK because I quite follow the sport, but I wouldn't have known any of the backstory because very few people were talking about it apart from journalists like yourself. That's the kind of tragedy of all this.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting how it plays out. I mean, it's so strange because, as I say, on the one hand, everybody knows his name in Ireland. Everybody knows who he is, what he's done, what he's responsible for. where he should be. And at the same time, he's out wandering around. And it'll be interesting what information that 5 million brings in. And is it enough to prosecute him? Because it just seems so strange that within the public conversation, everyone is saying he's guilty, he's done this, he's done that. And yet there isn't that case against him yet.
Yeah. And my final thing to ask you, Ewan, was about, your own role as a sports writer. And when you do this stuff, has sport become, as we've seen more money from people like Daniel Kinahan, or like we talked about, the UAE, Saudi Arabia, or, other, it's become bigger business, become more commercial. Has that sort of diluted sport for someone like yourself? Obviously, it's a passion of yours, you write about it, but has it kind of made you sort of less in love with it because you see more cynical? It's no longer just the pure sporting endeavour.
Yeah, most of the time. I mean, even from covering like the Olympics and the World Cup in Brazil, I would have spent. My wife is Brazilian. I lived there for many years. You would have seen the money taken, private money or public money going private, the corruption around it, that ordinary people were left living in hovels as all this money goes to Zurich and FIFA and all, or the IOC. So most of the time, yeah, I mean, it's really grubby. Now, in saying that, as much, for example, as I might give out about Manchester City, and I find their owners odious, and then at the same time, like with Atletico Madrid, I couldn't take my eyes off the shithousery of the last 10 minutes last week. So there are moments you go, fuck, this is still great. But I guess you just have to be realistic about it as well, that it is what it is. It's odious behind the scenes. It's grubby. There's some awful people in there. And sometimes you just need to forget all that and enjoy it for 90 minutes or whatever else.
Yeah, but I mean, I can imagine it must take the shine off it because, maybe starting off as a younger person, you're just all into sport, and as this stuff becomes more prevalent, it must make it a less enjoyable atmosphere to be part of.
I guess so, but then the flip side of that is like, and I'll probably get berated from people here. I mean, I'll watch the fight on Saturday and I'll probably enjoy it. I'm kind of looking forward to it, and people will go, well, how can you, knowing where this money is coming from and whatever else? I guess, do you know what? I'm so cynical at this point. I've just accepted this is the way it is, and while I can highlight it, it'll never change it. And if it wasn't Daniel Kinahan's money, it'd be someone else.
Yeah. No, it's a very insightful what you're saying, but it's almost slightly depressing, isn't it? It's almost like kind of the world we're in's like become there's bad and then there's less bad. It's
there's a bit of that. I mean, it's funny. Like I Cruzeiro, the football club in Brazil, would be my big passion, and they're in the second division now. And then here in Portugal, I follow the local club in Division 4. And I think I get more enjoyment out of that than the bigger stuff. Because while it's shite, I guess it's more pure. And that there isn't that big business interest behind it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Ewan, for joining me. I know you've got a website and your own podcast. Maybe you want to mention that, maybe, because I know people can sort of consume your content. It's all out there. You're quite prolific on the online and sort of content world.
Yeah, I kind of started a podcast back in December called Think for Yourself, because during COVID, I got very frustrated with how the media were covering things, with the bias, with selected experts, and I wanted to kind of delve into stuff from different angles, as long as it's truthful and logical. But there are different ways of looking at things. So yeah, that comes out once every couple of weeks, and I have links to it on my Twitter page. So that's what I'm mostly doing actually now, and I'm kind of enjoying it because I can step away from an editor saying you have to look at it this way or you have to fit into this narrative, and I can kind of do my own thing and try and, I don't know, I guess you don't have to agree with it, but I think other views are worth hearing sometimes.
I mean, I would have thought you might be inundated with Daniel Kinahan requests, because I mean, obviously you're quite, the pieces you've done are quite prominent. Have quite a few people reached out to talk about them? Because I'd imagine people like myself are looking for experts to sort of, shows behind the veil, shall we say?
No, I'm not particularly popular after the last couple of years at the minute, because seemingly I must be the world's first vaccinated anti-vaxxer, seemingly, because I basically said I didn't think a mandate you shouldn't have to if you don't want to. It should be a choice. And I also argued quite prolifically against lockdowns, because I thought they do more damage than good in the long term. and seemingly that wasn't very popular in media and with journalists around the place. So I've been kind of kicked to the fringes for the moment.
So basically what you're saying is Daniel Kinahan is more accepted than you in some circles, and that's,
Oh, very much so.
Well, I don't know if that's a compliment or not, but, but thank you for joining me today, Ewan. It's been a pleasure. And like I say, your articles on Daniel Kinahan, the subject we've talked about, are still on. People can go out there and check them out and maybe listen to your podcast as well. But thank you for taking the time. It's been a pleasure.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks a million, Chris.